Today's session is we're gonna talk a little bit about performance management. But before we do that, let me show you a couple of things here. If you're in need of closed captioning, there's a button at the bottom of your screen, the box with with CC in it. Click on that, and it'll provide a transcript. It's a reasonable transcript that you can follow along with as we go. All right, a couple of announcements I want to make you aware of. First of all, we have this thing called the Supervisor Survival Guide, and that is available to anyone who would like some development. Hold on just one second. I'm checking on my Bizarro call over here. It looks like we still have a bunch of people over there. Give me 1 second just to send that message one more time that we're needing to come over here. Everybody that can hear my voice, ignore what's on the screen. I'm sharing this slideshow, I guess, in both appointments. So I'm trying to get everybody to refresh their calendars and come over to this new appointment. That's the last time we'll deal with that, but I just want to make sure that everybody has the opportunity if they can. All right, Supervisor Survival Guide. You can find that if you go to the Employee Gateway and you look for the training drop-down menu. At the very bottom of the list of things that comes in the drop-down menu, you'll see Supervisor Survival Guide. And what this is some fundamental training for managers, and it's specifically tailored to Utah state managers. So if you're new in a position of leadership, or if you've been there for a while and are like, hey, I could use some refreshers, it's a pretty robust training. It's 5 or 6 modules, fairly in depth, and it covers a lot of different topics specific to the state of Utah. All right. The other thing I wanted to make you aware of is the CLIP assessment. The CLIP assessment is a kind of a one-off coaching session. We send out a survey to your folks that you lead. They rate you on a number of areas, and then we go over the perceptions that your folks have about you. And both of those things are available right now. The way you can find them, I'm going to send this slideshow out at the end of our meeting today, and these are live links. So you'll be able to click on either of these and go straight there to sign up for those as you go. So you can see, yeah, that's a live link, and there's another live link. Okay. Next month on April 13th, 2022, 10 a.m., Wesley Porter from DHRM will be presenting on creating connection with inclusive leadership. And that one is going to be a pretty, I think it's going to be a really nice topic to dive into. Let me tell you just a little bit more about it. Here's the blurb that he sent me about the session. We live in a very diverse state with different experiences, different backgrounds. There's not just a variety in our communities, there's also diversity in our workforce, and a lot of intrinsic and extrinsic motivators for each of us. These motivations are connected to our personal and professional experiences in life. And inclusive leadership helps balance all these elements by providing tools to help leaders adapt and connect quickly to diverse scenarios and alternate perspectives with an open mind to produce the desired results. Inclusive leadership allows teams to perform better and more collaboratively when believed in, and to make better impactful decisions. During this webinar, the one that we'll do next month on the 13th of April, we'll discuss blind spots in leadership, what inclusive leadership is and what it is not, the traits of inclusive leaders, including behaviors versus programs, and how to create safety and deal with vulnerability. So that will be, I think, a pretty informative session. Be sure to sign up for that. We'll send out a link to sign up for it at the end of this session, along with an evaluation form and access to the slides that I'll be using today. So watch for that at the end of the session today. I'm Rick Murdoch. I'm here to talk about leadership topics. I come about every 3 or 4 months And we appreciate you guys being here. The response to our off-the-shelf stuff has been pretty overwhelming, and we really do appreciate that you take time to come and join us for these. We think the discussions can be useful, and we really appreciate it. Our first one we did back in May of 2020, almost 2 years ago now. I was lucky enough to host that first one, and I assume some of you were actually there. This is probably, I think this is the 30th session that we've done. The reason I say that is because I want you to be aware that these are recorded and then archived on our YouTube channel. You can just go to YouTube and type in DHRM CFE. CFE stands for Center for Excellence. DHRM CFE off the shelf. And you'd find our archives of, I think, about 30 of these sessions. And you know, we're almost 2 years since the beginning of these, and it just brings back some interesting memories of, you know, sitting in our PJs and trying to figure out this whole virtual thing. A month ago, though, you may have seen this slide. At the time, this is the topic that I wanted to talk about. At the time, I kind of had a vague concept of what it was that we were going to talk about in this session today. But as the weeks went by, it just kind of came into sharp focus for me. We're going to talk about tools today that will help you manage performance in your teams. Now, these tools are not the tools that you might immediately think of when you're thinking of performance management. These are tools that you probably think about more when you're thinking about being polite, or when you're thinking about helping people in your communities, or when you're thinking about being honest and straightforward. And you're right, but those tools are tools that help with performance management. Some of the best tools you have at your disposal are truth and honesty, transparency, and sharing information. Spoiler alert, that's really what the tools that we're going to be talking about today. I think we need to define these a little bit, because I mean, we all know what truth is. We all know what transparency is to some degree. But when we're talking about them in a business context, we kind of need to define exactly what that means. So let's start with performance management. Here's a definition of performance management that I found at the University of Kansas. Their HR department defines performance management this way. They say it's an ongoing, continuous process of communicating and clarifying job responsibilities, priorities, performance expectations, and development planning that optimizes an individual performance to align with organizational strategic goals. Okay, I've read this about 4 or 5 times. It starts out kind of feeling like business speak, maybe a little bit, and I guess it kind of is. But if we were to boil it down, what we're really saying here is that we help our people understand their jobs so they can do their part in helping our agency succeed. That's what performance management is. It's helping our people understand their jobs well enough that they can do their part in helping our agencies or divisions or groups succeed. And we do this by discussing personal and organizational goals. We do this by removing obstacles that might stand in our folks' way. We help them be their best selves. And in return, they do the work. And we call it performance management, but really, as Dan Chase points out quite often, performance management is just management. We can just kind of get rid of that word. This is management. We're talking about leading people. Performance management is simply management. What else are we doing? What else are we managing if it's not to help people perform well? So let's just kind of get that mindset set for us, if we could. Let's think about how we are, as managers, always managing performance. We're always looking for improvement. All right. So according to thebalancedcareers.com, employees leave managers, not jobs. So we've heard that a lot, right? We leave when we're unhappy with our job. It's most often because of how we're being managed. And when we leave, it's often we're leaving our managers. But what can a manager do to make an employee happy? I mean, it's not always obvious what we can do to keep people happy and in their jobs. Lots of managers think that they've fulfilled all of their duties when they just, provide a paycheck. State provides you a paycheck, that should be enough. And in a lot of ways, yeah, that's, I guess, at a really rudimentary level, that's true. But it's really not enough if you want to have people feeling happy and fulfilled. If you want a productive workplace, it's not enough. But there's one attribute that studies are showing that employees want more than anything else. And if you have this attribute as a manager, you'll find yourself rated pretty high as far as bosses go. And that one characteristic is honesty. Honesty leads to a happy and productive workplace. Honesty from management leads to a happy and productive workplace. Honesty is actually a tool for managing performance. Here's a definition for honesty. Honesty or truthfulness is a facet of moral character that connotes positive and virtuous attributes such as integrity, truthfulness, straightforwardness, including straightforwardness of conduct, along with the absence of lying, cheating, theft, etc. Honesty also involves being trustworthy, loyal, fair, and sincere. So, we're talking about being truthful. Let's define truth for a second. We all know what it is. But really, truth is beliefs, propositions, declarative statements that aim to represent reality. It's important that we remember this. Truth is how we choose to represent reality. And a lot of times it has to do with our perceptions, it has to do with our point of view and things like that. But let's imagine a scenario here for a second to just kind of illustrate the idea of truth. Oh, wait, before we do that, I want to take a poll really quickly, if you don't mind. Oh, somebody in the chat, you may notice that somebody, Michael Allred, added a couple other, some links that will take you to some of our webinars. All right, so for the poll, let's go over, if you go down to your, to the right-hand side, bottom of your screen, you'll see some shapes, a square, a triangle, a circle. I'm going to launch a poll here. You go there and you can answer the poll for us. Those of you that are in the live stream won't be able to do this with us, and my apologies for that. There's just too many people that are trying to get on at the same time. But go ahead and go to that poll and answer for me, if you would, the question that's on the screen now. Do you want to hear the truth when it comes to your personal work performance? Do you want the truth when it comes to your personal work performance? Yes is leading by a very large margin. That is what I expected, but it's funny to actually see it there. All right, everybody wants the truth when it comes to their personal work performance, it looks like. Okay, so let's imagine a scenario here then where you're assigned to write a report on how new legislation will affect your agency. So your job is to look at bills that have passed and write a report telling the agency how one of those bills is going to affect your agency. Now, you went through that process, you put a lot of effort and time into it, you presented, or at least submitted your report to your supervisor, and here is the feedback you get. Your report is terrible, poorly written, amateurishly argued, full of errors, and 2 hours late. It's the truth, right? Imagine receiving this feedback on a work assignment that you put a lot of effort into. How do you feel about the truth? What reality does this particular delivery of truth aim to represent? What reality are we aiming to represent in the truth presented in this fashion? I want you to think about that. That's a rhetorical question, but I want you to think about it. Our brains don't really know the difference between physical threat and emotional threat. Either way, when presented with something that is either real or even perceived as a threat, our rational brains tend to take a back seat. The limbic system takes over. The limbic system takes over, and we've got fight, flight, or freeze kind of takes over, and we're not able to think efficiently. And the last thing we're going to do when presented with some sort of threat is make nuanced improvements. So yes, this statement is true. It is true. And perhaps it's the only, maybe it's the way that we need to present the information. Maybe as a manager, we have to say it this way in order to get it through. Maybe. Let's look at maybe the way a different manager might approach it. How about this one? Thanks for your work on this report. We didn't end up using it though. Truth, right? What's the outcome here? Again, this time, there's nothing that could be interpreted as a threat. But what reality is this response aiming to represent? What are we aiming to represent with this truth? How do you feel as the person who's done the report after you've worked hard on a project and you get this response? I mean, one of the one thing you might think is that that your boss is assigning you busy work, right? They're not even going to use the report that I spent 4 hours on. And the other thing that you don't know is that you don't know that your work wasn't up to snuff. It wasn't given to you. All right, so I'm going to try to give you, and I guess one of the reasons that someone might use this scenario, like thanks for your work on that report, we didn't end up using it though, is to avoid hurting feelings, right? But the question that we might ask is, what's more kind? Because this is not likely to be the last time that this employee turns in a poor performance. And there's really no chance for improvement in this scenario. All right, let me show you a third response here. I found some issues with the report that we need to talk about in detail. I wish we had more time to fix it, but we don't, so I won't be able to use it. Talking of the report. Again, this is truth, right? And some of you might be thinking, oh, this is just a delay tactic, or this is beating around the bush. And you're right, if the conversation never happens. But if a timely conversation happens where the errors and issues with the report are pointed out, the employee is trained on how to fix the errors in the future, then this truth leads to improvement. And this scenario does not repeat. This is an example of truth being used strategically to spark improvement. Truth is a tool that we can use for performance management. But you can see that there are ways that it could be misused as well, right? All three of these responses are truth. The first one kind of demotivated. It made someone feel like there was a personal issue, that maybe they weren't good enough, they wouldn't be good enough. It demotivated. The second one avoided sparking any improvement at all. This third one is a good start for hopefully helping with improvement. So, oh, I never even showed it. Sorry about that. There's that slide. I found some issues with the report that we need to talk about in detail. I wish we had more time to fix it, but we don't, so I won't be able to use it. All right, so truth. Truth is a training tool. Also, truth is perception. And when we realize that truth is perception, the way that we present truth kind of changes a little bit. We can add to our truth things that will help people. We can make it more this. Truth can be kind. And in fact, truth is kind when it's not, when there's not motivation around it that isn't kind, right? The way we present truth, our motivation behind that is whether it's kind or not. But truth is always going to be kind because it's going to tell people where they actually stand. And knowing where you actually stand is actually more kind than not knowing where you stand. Truth can be influenced by perspective. We have to keep that in mind. And sometimes truth can be hard to spot. And as managers who are leveraging truth as a training tool, as an improvement tool, we have to get good at spotting truth, useful truth. All right, another tool that we have in our tool belts is transparency. I looked up several definitions of transparency as I was kind of getting prepared for this presentation today. And in every case, these two words were included: honest and open. An honest and open organization is a transparent organization. And what does transparency really do for us? Well, it does a lot of things, actually. It signals to clients, customers, employees, stakeholders, the public, that there's nothing to hide in this organization. You can trust us. We function on the up and up. Transparency also leads to trust among employees, leads to buy-in, it leads to engagement, leads to understanding. It squelches rumor mills. There are fewer rumors when an organization is transparent. It leads to a better sense of psychological safety. Psychological safety is that feeling that you have when you know that if you mess up, you'll be supported and helped to improve rather than punished. It leads to fewer silos. Leads to less zero-sum competition between divisions or units. And it gives a sense of ownership to employees. Because transparency, when you can see the inner workings of an organization and you see where you fit in those inner workings, you suddenly feel some ownership. You feel some ownership over that end goal. You feel ownership over the vision and the mission that the organization is heading towards. So how do we accomplish transparency? Pretty simple. All you have to do is share as much information as is appropriate to share. Now, of course, there's sensitive things that should not be shared, and you're going to want to be very careful as you define what is okay to share and what is not. But for the most part, we could share more than we do. And there's value to be found in sharing of information. You share as much as you can, appropriately share. That makes you a transparent organization, and that leads to all those outcomes that we listed earlier. We tend to want to gatekeep, though, right? We want to gatekeep the things that are special about us, the knowledge that we have or the skill that we have that nobody else on the team has. And so we hang on to it tight, because if we were to share it with people, then suddenly we're not as valuable, and maybe we're not as special as we thought. And we also tend to hold on to things that are less flattering, right? But it is better, especially with those less flattering things, it's better to share it with our context. If we're the ones sharing it, we get to set the context. It's much better than having, say, a reporter on television news or in a newspaper sharing that thing without the context that makes it understandable. We've all seen that, right? We've seen news articles where if you've ever been involved in something that's been reported in the news and you read the article, you always see that it's been slightly misinterpreted because they just don't have the same background that the people that are involved in it do. It always feels like it's just a little bit off whenever I've read something that I've been involved in. Sharing information can be hard, though. And in order to do it, at least one of the places that we're going to get the information that we have that we need to share is in these meetings that we have with our peers and our upline, our bosses. And so we have to be good at capturing that information, filtering it, and then taking it back to our people. And one way that we can do that is by taking effective notes. Without taking effective notes, we don't retain things very well. So I'm going to remind you of something that you probably learned in school. It's called the Cornell note-taking system. You remember this? Now, this was designed with a sheet of paper and a pen in mind, but it could be modified to be electronic if you prefer to take notes, either voice memo or even typing. But here's the idea. On a sheet of paper, you make a column down the left-hand side, a skinny column down the left-hand side, and then you draw a line at the bottom and leave yourself some space at the bottom. And then you take all of your meeting notes in the right-hand section of the paper, right? There's your meeting notes right here. And you just write down what you hear in the meeting, bulleted probably, jotted down important things. And then when the meeting's over, you take a second to build a cue list and summarize the meeting. So the cue list is the 4 or 5 main themes of the meeting on the left-hand column, kind of grouped as you talked about them, so that you can see this, oh, that's the topic there, and then come over and get the details over here. And then you also summarize the meeting at the bottom of the page so that you can really quickly access what that meeting was about. Now, if you're shifting this to, say, an electronic format, it'd be easy to do it in a spreadsheet. It'd be easy to do it in a doc, a Google Doc or a Word doc. But if you're taking notes in some other way, just keep in mind that there are 3 sections here: your meeting notes, your cue list, and your summary. And it doesn't matter how it's designed or what it looks like. Just keep that in mind, because the summary and the cue list will keep it fresh in your mind. It'll help you retain. If you've done it right after the meeting while it's still fresh, it will help you retain those details that you need to share. Then you can go back to your people and you can share them the information that you got out of that meeting, and transparency grows. And people start to feel like they're included, and they start to feel like they own something in your organization. So taking good notes is an important part of transparency. Taking good notes and sharing them back with your folks. Of course, you're going to filter for things that are sensitive, that shouldn't be shared, but this is a good way to help retain that stuff. All right. Again, from thebalancedcareers.com. We want honest managers. I mentioned this earlier. The studies show that people just really want honest managers. They want honesty from management, I guess is what we really say. But honest managers do several things. One of the things that they do is that they give real feedback. Honest managers let their employees know when their performance is good and when it's bad. Honest managers will say great job when the job is done well, and they won't steal credit from their people. But they also will say, here's where you made some mistakes, and here's what you need to do to fix those mistakes. Many managers don't give great feedback because they either don't think it's important or they don't want to deal with the awkwardness of it. It's not easy to say to your employee. I mean, you're working with these people day in, day out. You see them more than your family in some cases. It's really difficult to say you're not doing a great job, but it's really important to be able to have that conversation. And your best employees will actually really appreciate the feedback. And they will see it as an opportunity to improve as an employee. And if you've built the culture where you're safe to make mistakes because you're going to be helped to improve from those mistakes, and we're going to learn our lessons from our mistakes, if that's our culture, then we don't feel those threats. The amygdala doesn't take over. We actually feel comfortable talking about how we're going to get better and how we're going to provide the very best possible quality for our for whatever it is that we do. Your best employees will see improvement and development as a positive career opportunity. And again, this doesn't mean that honest managers are rude. They find the way to tell the truth as straightforward as they can without making it personal and without causing that flash of fight or flight. They also They also are not afraid when they find that an employee isn't cutting it. They're not afraid to go through the steps. Go through the steps that would lead to taking that employee and getting them in another seat on the bus or on another bus altogether. They're not afraid of that because they want what's best for that employee too. And sometimes improvement just isn't possible in certain areas for some employees. And when that's the case, the best thing we can do for that person is help them find where they will do well. And that's what honest managers do. Honest managers also provide clear expectations. In other words, at the end of the performance year, when you're sitting down with your folks, they are never surprised by what they hear from you. They've heard it all year long. They know if they're not on track to pass this performance plan. They know if they are on track. They know. And one of the things, I'm not going to get into any of the details of House Bill 104, because I think some of it's still being hammered out how it's going to be interpreted. But one of the things that's been added to our performance management duties from House Bill 104 is to have quarterly assessments. What that means is that on a quarterly basis, we'll sit down with our people and say, you're on track, you're doing well with your performance plan, or you're not on track and here's where you need to improve. This will save us from having to surprise people with a failed performance plan at the end of the year. Honest managers set expectations and follow up on them regularly. Notice there's a theme here. There's a lot of dialogue going back and forth between honest managers and their subordinates. They know an honest manager knows what their people's goals are, and they know how to help them and support them in those goals. An honest manager also admits to personal mistakes. Nobody's perfect. No boss is perfect. No employee is perfect. And an honest manager is willing to take the lumps when they make a mistake. They also say, I'm sorry, or thanks for letting me know. I'm glad that the error is fixable, stuff like that. Admitting mistakes it goes against our natural inclinations. It does. It feels like we're making ourselves vulnerable and open to threat. So it's really difficult to do. But it's a critical skill for managers to develop as well as employees to develop, because it's okay to make mistakes if we're learning from them. And it's harder to learn from a mistake if we're trying to cover it up. Oh, and one other thing, when an employee makes a mistake, honest managers own part of that mistake, because it's the manager's job to train and develop employees, to monitor their work. And so when an employee makes a mistake or causes some issue, part of that blame goes on the manager. And so we kind of have to understand that. And if we've made the culture so that we can just accept that and then improve, then we're going to be just fine. Employees, of course, need to face consequences for things that they do that are not up and up. But the manager should also say, what could I have done to prevent that mistake? All right, and finally, and we've already talked about this, an honest manager shares as much information as possible. A lot of bosses say, I have an open door policy, but the door only swings one way. Bosses love to have you come in and tell them everything that you can tell them, but they often will hold on to information that they don't share as much back to their folks. So just remember, if you have an open door policy, it needs to swing both ways. Yeah, in essence, that's transparency, isn't it? We've basically talked about that. Let's talk a little bit about these conversations that we're talking about, these conversations that happen, they're happening regularly, they happen throughout the year, but the one that we think about most is the one at the end of the year, right? When we sit down to talk about performance management. The best performance managers, the best managers of performance, they will have these types of conversations quite often. And especially when there is some sort of conflict that arises. Let's talk about that for a second. We'll call it dialogue, having dialogue with our folks. Dialogues, a lot of times is one that you think about, the word you think about when you're talking about trying to deal with conflict, when you're trying to solve a conflict. And managers often will have to dive in to solve those conflicts. Sometimes it's between two employees, sometimes it's between a customer and an employee, sometimes it's between the public and an employee, a boss and an employee. Whatever the case, you're going to be dealing with conflict from time to time. Adar Cohen, in his TEDx talk about leading difficult conversations, gives 3 points of advice that I think are really good for helping lead a dialogue, lead a difficult conversation. The first one is move toward the conflict. And what that means is that you imagine where the biggest disagreement is. What are these two disagreeing about? What am I disagreeing about with my employee? You imagine what that is, and then you go there. That's where you go to talk. You talk about that actual disagreement. You don't beat around the bush. You don't try to let subtext deal with it. We probably need to talk about that for a second. A lot of times we will think that subtext will solve our problems when an actual frank conversation has to happen in order to solve our problems. Subtext is, saying something that's related, or another version of subtext is training the entire team on an issue that only one of the team has a problem with. When we have a conflict, we move towards that conflict. We're brave about it. We walk right up into it. The TED Talk I mentioned earlier, this person helped with dialogue between some prisoners and some prison guards, like prison gang members and some prison guards, in the conflict that they were having in this giant prison in Detroit, Michigan. And he had to walk right up to what would be considered a fairly scary element and talk about things that were difficult. And sometimes that just needs to happen. And if you go there and and talk about it, it does tend to kind of narrow the scope of it. Part of what we want to do when we're leading dialogue is we want to at least, we want to just not know anything. I'm not saying that we really don't know anything. I'm saying that we're gonna let whatever comes out be the information, right? We're not going to bring preconceived information in with us. If you do know something, we kind of pretend like we don't, not necessarily pretend to deceive, but we just, in other words, we let people explain their point of view out loud. We don't assume we already know it. We let them explain it out loud. Now, the reason that we want them to explain it out loud is because point of view is perception and emotion. And a lot of times emotion makes something bigger than it is. And so when someone's explaining their point of view out loud, just hearing themselves say it sometimes can just focus that scope. It can kind of reduce the scope of the emotional part around it. We ask questions because we don't know anything. And we make them kind of argue for their point of view. And then we also ask them to give us space to argue our point of view, or let the other party argue their point of view. And we get both points of view out there as clearly as we can. And if we're leading the discussion, we basically keep quiet. We don't do much of the talking. We actively listen, and we ask questions, and we let that happen. And what will happen as we talk through these conflicts, we'll start to find solutions. Sometimes we can't find a solution. Sometimes the solution is, well, you need to stay over here in your corner, and you need to stay in that corner, and let's not cause this contention or this conflict by doing these three things. We set some rules and we leave it at that. But sometimes we'll be able to find an actual solution where both parties can agree, where there's wins for everybody. And those types of discussions are the types of discussions that we're having when we're dealing with performance management. When we're trying to improve people, we imagine what's stopping them from improving, and we go there and we talk about it. We ask questions, we let people argue their perspective, and we listen. And then together we come up with a solution. When we come up together with this, when together we come up with a solution, we have ownership in both parties. Now, performance discussions are not as useful if they don't come out with some sort of goal attached to them. Studies show that improvement, if you really want improvement, you have to set a goal. You have to set a goal as part of these dialogues. And so that's why performance management plans are so important, and that we have specific, well thought out goals that follow the SMART model, as we're all familiar with. One of the letters in SMART, SMA, a lot of times we think of that as achievable, but really I think the best word for A in the SMART goal acronym is acceptable. In other words, the person that is going to be working on the goal has accepted that goal as something that they can and should do. That gives them ownership. Keep that in mind as you set your goals with your performance management discussions. Now, all of this is to say, we've kind of talked through a lot of stuff. All of this is to say that the very best tool that we have for performance management, the very, very best tool we have, is to help employees be engaged in their work. Daniel Pink, who is a self-help author and a social scientist, he has this acronym, MAP, that lists 3 things that lead to employee engagement. And like I said, engagement is the ultimate performance management tool. Engagement is the ultimate management tool, right? Performance management is management. Those 3 items are this: mastery, autonomy, and purpose. If we can help our folks achieve mastery, autonomy, and purpose in their jobs, they will be engaged. And engagement, again, is the ultimate performance management tool. So let's talk about each of these individually briefly. Mastery comes from proper instruction and practice. In other words, and so somebody that's gaining mastery is doing the thing, and they're being instructed on how to do it properly. They're being coached, and they're getting practice. Now you're like, okay, well, my people have to be doing their jobs. Yeah, that's right. The practice part of it is actually doing the job. It's on the job type training. And the instruction part of it is actually management. So this is happening. Now, when's the last time you checked in to see if your folks have mastered their duties? What are they awesome at? What do they struggle with? And if they struggle, they're probably not engaged. In this context, the word coaching might be better than instruction. You get practice by doing, and on-the-job training is an effective way to master things. However, it's possible to practice something incorrectly, isn't it? We're practicing, and we do it so much that we've just ingrained an incorrect habit. So the coaching part of it, especially for newer employees, is really, really important, that we're making sure that whatever task they're doing is being done correctly, and that they're getting the practice they need to learn how to do the thing correctly. Yeah, you practice it wrong, you become the master of doing things wrong. Again, coaching, instructing with an open dialogue is where people seeking mastery are able to achieve it. The open dialogue will help when there are mistakes, and the setting of culture where mistakes are acceptable and we develop from mistakes is going to help too. So mastery, let them do it. The second thing is autonomy. And as I was making this slide, I wrote, give up some control. And I was like, sheesh, it's just so much more crisp to say give up control. But man, I don't want to give up control. I don't want to not have at least some control. And then I realized that's the problem. We can't give up that control and let people be autonomous in their jobs, right? Nobody wants to be micromanaged. So here's what you can do. You can let people have autonomy. And if you feel uncomfortable about that, the thing that you can do is just measure the stuff that's important. Measure the things that you're concerned about. Well, if I give up control, I won't know if they're doing this, or this. Okay, so measure those things. Now, one thing to keep in mind, and measurements could be, task completions or however many widgets they've made, or checking quality assurance, something like that. But one thing to keep in mind is when we measure things, we tend to get what we measure. And sometimes we measure things that would lead us to bad results. For example, I recently heard in one of the sessions that I was leading about a call center that measured call numbers. They measured the volume of calls, how many calls were going through. That's what they measured. And so the more calls you took in that call center, the better your measured outcome was. So what do you suppose the outcome of that was? The highest performers were getting tons of calls every day, doing just a bunch of calls. But what they noticed is that they started getting all kinds of complaints from the people that were on the other end of those calls, because quality was not being measured. Quantity was being measured, but not quality. And so imagine being in that call center and caring about the person on the other end of the line and giving a quality call. And then when you're done at the end of the day, you're labeled a poor performer because you don't have the numbers. You can see how that might lead to some bad outcomes. So when we choose what we're going to measure so that we can allow autonomy, we got to be really careful that we're not making unintended consequences. And then the final thing is purpose. Help people feel like they make a difference. And the easiest way to do that is just help them know how their work ties into the agency mission and goals. Their work is an essential cog that's leading to this big outcome. Transparency helps with this, doesn't it? Make sure you praise them and you honestly let them know when you think they have done great work. You honestly let them know when you need them to, when you want them to improve, and also paint the picture of what happens when the improvement takes place. Announce their triumphs publicly, thank them privately, help them see truth in how good they are at what they do. If you can do that, you can help people find purpose. All right. So let's just quickly review what we've been over today. We appreciate honesty from our management. That is a tool that helps us perform well. We appreciate transparency from our organizations, helps us perform well. We appreciate dialogue that leads to solutions and doesn't lead to more conflict. We like to follow maps when the maps allow us to achieve mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And we take notes that we can share. That's what I've got for you today. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for your time, your attention. My apologies to those that got stuck in the other appointment this morning. That was a mistake on my part, and I apologize for it. Next month, as you know, we have, oops, let's get to that slide so you can see it. We have this, Creating Connection with Inclusive Leadership with Wesley Porter from DHRM. Ought to be a great discussion. Please watch for the email today so you can sign up for that, April 13th at 10 a.m. And that's all I've got for you. Thanks so much for your time and attention. We'll talk to you another time.